everybody. You're listening to the Comic Book Bears podcast. I'm Billy Z.
I'm Steve Morey.
And unfortunately, we don't have brother Bryan with us tonight. Bryan recently had a trip to Japan, which we can't wait to hear all about. We certainly saw enough of the pictures, but so jealous. But joining us in the cave is our favorite appropriator of bear culture, according to his co-hosts. And this is a gentleman who's appeared on our show before, and since that time, we talk to him every day, and we're not kidding, we talk to him every day. From the Southern Fried Geekery podcast, Caleb, how are you doing tonight, sir?
I'm great. Thank you for that opening. I think you're going too far when you call me a gentleman, but I am the naked mole rat of bear culture, so I'll take that.
Oh, stop it.
Everyone's favorite hairless bear.
It ain't just the hair. All right. So we're going to talk about a single topic tonight. Who are we kidding? We're going to go off on tangents. But there is something that's been affecting the comic book industry over the last 2 years. And I think it's high time that we put in our 2 cents about it. It's certainly something that's affected past guests of our shows, personal friends of ours. And what we're talking about is Comicsgate. Now, I'm going to go right to Wikipedia to give you a description just because I started writing a squib about it. I didn't even know where to start because there's so many topics that its tentacles touch. So in the past, you would call it the Reader's Digest version, dumbed down version. In the current day and age is Wikipedia. Let's face it, if you hear something new, that's the first resource you look at. Comicsgate is a controversial campaign focused on the North American superhero comic book industry and the creators who work in it. The name is derived from Gamergate, a similarly controversial movement related to video games. Comics artist Ethan Van Sciver presents it as a consumer-led revolt against liberalism in the industry and part of the culture war. Artist Mike S. Miller describes it as an alliance of comic book fans, critics, and creators who have found common cause in standing up against what they see as a hard push by, oh Christ, I hate this term, social justice warriors into their hobby. Participants blame forced diversity in both hiring and comics content for a decline in sales. Critics of the movement have described it as a harassment campaign which targets women, people of color, and LGBT folk in the comic book industry. It has been blamed for vandalism of a store that did not stock comics created by its members and has been behind threats of violence against others. Members of the movement have rallied against things that they feel exemplify problems in the comics industry, which interfere with their entertainment. Examples include storylines in which traditionally male characters who have had the identities of Iron Man, Thor, Hulk, and Spider-Man have been temporarily replaced by female and or racial minority characters, stories dealing with social issues, and the depiction of women with less idealized figures. Professionals in the movement complain of discrimination against them for their socio-political views. Van Sciver describes a left-wing dominance in the comic book industry, which has led to oppressive social justice warrior harassment and blacklisting, and called for escapist apolitical entertainment. In the industry's pursuit of a more diverse marketplace, industry veteran Chuck Dixon and Brett R. Smith, both politically conservative, alleged in May 2016 that they had been blacklisted by Marvel and DC. Despite this, DC published Bane Conquest, a 12-issue miniseries written by Dixon between 2017 and 2018. Professionals in the movement complain of discrimination against them for their socio-political views. Van Sciver describes a left-wing dominance in the comic book industry, which has led to oppressive social justice warrior harassment and blacklisting, and called for escapist apolitical entertainment. A lot of people say that the triggering event for this was when, just some background, Flo Steinberg was a Marvel office worker for most of her life. I believe she retired when she was 85 from the Marvel office. It was part of the original Marvel bullpen. And when she passed away... She was
the Fabulous Flo.
Fabulous Flo, yeah. And then when she passed away in, I believe 2 years ago at the age of 93, God bless her, man, a number of female staffers went for a milkshake. The only crossover that we've had from DC and Marvel was the Instagram post where the DC women did the same thing in honor. And it was posted by an assistant editor named Heather Antos. And it, for some reason, hit a spot and enraged people because of the way I see it, effectively women working in comics.
Yeah.
Would you say that that's a fair assessment?
Absolutely. The actual image of a group of female professionals going out for a milkshake inspired some really horrendous blowback, at least in my opinion. Things like fake geek girls, and these are people who are working in the industry. You know, they've already carved out their niche a little bit in that spot, and to be called fake, and it was ascertained by certain people that this was exactly what was wrong with comics. Women celebrating one of their predecessors by having a milkshake. To me, that's the mindset you're dealing with here.
Right. And Steve, as somebody who is a gamer, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
That's a fair assessment of you. This basically mirrors a lot of, not some of the journalism attacks, at least at this point, that Gamergate is kind of known for, but it basically mirrors what went down there, correct?
No, well, I wouldn't draw an exacting parallel between the two, because Gamergate, was ultimately more about the culture around games journalism at first, more than like the intellectual properties themselves and the people working on those same intellectual properties. There was a lot of very personal attacks that kind of started with the Gamergate, and yeah, it was more or less absorbed into the greater mindset that women have no business working in this industry because it's been traditionally male. Any type of opinion, or popularity or success must come at the expense of, a man, or that the only reason that a woman is in any position whatsoever of success is because they, sucked or slept their way to the top. So with Comicsgate, I think it's more of an evolved or devolved, if you want to look at it that way, sort of approach to general diversity in media, representation in media, intersectionality in media. I mean, it's basically like an opposite response to the general idea that media is better if it more represents the readership, or at least the potential readership for comics. So, hiring more comics creators from different backgrounds who aren't all necessarily straight white men, having characters that are more reflective of these creators' ideas of what they would like to see as a hero or a character, and even sometimes unfortunate, clumsy corporate ideas of what diverse characters and storylines should be in order to attract a different readership or a greater readership. So that just is kind of more or less the the alphabet soup of Comicsgate, is that it could be a blowback to anything political, racial, gender, sexual based politics, really anything that anybody doesn't like about anything that they see contemporarily kind of gets thrown into the mix. Yeah, exactly. It just kind of, it expands as much, and, sometimes it can go to a personal attack to a particular creator that someone just didn't like. And then it just kind of spirals by connecting them to, everything that's negative and bad about comics and whatnot. And I think one of the big things, and I think you mentioned this in the Wikipedia article, definition, is that it's a, consumer-led revolt. It really isn't.
Yeah, that was their original claim, was the comics are $3.99, and that's what we're protesting.
Yeah, hey, I would protest $3.99.
Who wouldn't?
I like to hold the line at $2.99. But you know what? When I started reading comics, in the late '80s and early '90s, I was paying $1 or $1.25. And I know, Bill, if we go back to when you were a kid, and I'm not calling you old, but
I am. Come on. If I was a horse, they would have shot me long ago.
But yeah, I mean, cost wise has always been an issue, and that's always something that's going to affect sales. But generally, it's a print medium. So if people can get their entertainment elsewhere for cheaper, they're going to do that. That's what the market does.
And for decades, it's been a niche medium. It hasn't been a profitable medium. It basically serves as R&D for bigger presences within the media landscape. And most people are aware of this. I'm not saying that you can't have success as a creator and you can't have a good living as a creator. That certainly is the case for many artists.
But not everybody's going to be Robert Kirkman.
Right.
I mean,
not everybody's going to land where they were hoping to.
That's the same in every industry, in every, nobody's going to be the next. I'm trying to think of like another, like if you're a novelist, not everybody's going to be J.K. Rowling. You're not going to wake up one day, after writing something in a cafe, and then you're a billionaire with a huge media empire.
And I think you have seen with Comicsgate, not just the disgruntled creators, but the disgruntled fans. And with this particular fandom, it's always been one that's been prone to overreaction and invented outrage. Yeah. That's nothing new. I mean, the example I will always cite was the cancellation of All New Adam, the book that was helmed by the Ryan Choi version of the Adam. If 1/3 of the people who complained about that cancellation actually bought the book, it would have been a top 5 book.
Yeah.
It's completely invented outrage.
Yeah.
When you have that coupled with bigotry and racism and sexism, it's really troubling. Of course, with the timeline that we see here, it basically rose as Trumpism and alt-right concerns coming to the forefront and made their way into the, I have to say, conventional landscape as well. So it's
right.
There's a lot of that which I found troubling from the get-go. I don't think anybody with half a brain wouldn't. The alignment with alt-right values, it perplexes me because you're talking about an industry that would not exist without immigrant Jews. And and that's another frustrating thing. That's always been a frustrating thing for me, of people not knowing their history. That bothers me in almost any context. It bothers me in music. It bothers me.
What bothers me more is not that they don't know it, but that they disregard it so willingly.
Yeah,
I don't think they're ignorant of it. I think they know it. I just don't think they care.
Well, and this is kind of I don't know. Maybe it's just the postmodern, philosophy student in me, but it seems like the idea of traditional representation is kind of taken on a different meaning for people who conflate what they have as an idealized version of their favorite characters or what they believe comics should be, and then their own biases. So, like you said, the comic books companies that are the big two, these characters that are the most well-known, longest-lasting, quote-unquote, traditional characters, a lot of them were created and for decades drawn, written by liberal, mostly well-educated, East Coast, mostly Jewish, writers. That this is not something where, these were traditionally just Anglo-Saxon, outposts of traditional, like, Aryan values. Like, that's not what comics have ever really been. Now, if you only choose to see, Thor as some big white dude with long blonde hair who, talks in weird Norse, Norse-ish English, yeah, cool. But then you have to look around at who was actually drawing him and who was coming up with these storylines and what kind of mindset and what kind of ideals they were trying to present on page and sell books at the same time. I mean, it was to make money, but I mean, politics did slip through. I mean, X-Men itself is basically the original social justice book.
You go back to Superman.
Superman was the original.
Superman.
Go back to the Phantom.
Superman is a New Deal FDR creation, if there ever was one.
Mm-hmm.
The alignment of those values are all there within, at the very least, the first 4 stories.
I mean, all of those original villains were, mob bosses, corrupt politicians and police, like, not, basically people who are picking on the little guy. Now, and I think this is kind of where, Comicsgate and Gamersgate, where they do coalesce together, is the idea of who is the little man. Who is the one who's being shit on? And in Comicsgate specifically, it's these creators who aren't getting the work that they feel that they're entitled to because of list your grievances. Who you don't like, that's why you're not getting the job. These minorities have taken your job. These women have taken your job. You have the wrong type of politics, and the people who control the editorial output have politics that are different than yours, and therefore they're not going to like you and they don't want to hire you, and that's why.
I think that really depends on your level of being vocal. There is one comics creator who is remarkably conservative. Remarkably conservative, and you don't see a trace of that in his work, and you certainly don't see a trace of that in his dealings with journalists or his commentary on Twitter or anything like that. He keeps it to himself.
Yeah.
Certainly there are people on the left that have gotten in trouble.
Exactly.
In relation to their politics, depending upon the time that particular controversy arose.
How they say things, how people phrase things, period. And I think this is kind of like where a lot of people lose sight about why they may not be getting hired. Because I'm not going to talk about every single creator out there who kind of jumps onto, the Comicsgate bandwagon as a way to, post why they deserve to sell books or why their books are superior because XYZ. Ultimately, you're going to be hired or fired or given work or not given work based on your personality, based on your quality of output, or sometimes your quantity of output. I mean, if you're on like one of those workhorse books and you can't make your pages by your deadlines to save your life, you're going to get, kicked off regardless of what your politics are, or whether you're a white dude or a non-white dude.
So I want to jump in here for just a second, if I can, because I think the last 10 minutes of our conversation is a really great example of why Comicsgate as a movement is problematic, and that's because anybody who's listening to this who may not be familiar with it is probably sitting at home asking themselves, well, is Comicsgate a consumer movement led by fans? Is it about politics in the creative sphere? Is it about censorship? Is it about how much money comics cost? And like all of these different tangents shooting off that have been a big part of the Comicsgate conversation. And the answer above all is, that's because the right hand of Comicsgate doesn't know what the left hand is doing, because there's no leadership, or at least no good leadership in doing it, because it's disingenuous to begin with. So if you go back and you want to talk about what like $3.99 comics and how much comics cost, are they expensive? Yes. And what does that do to the local comic shop? Because that's a big argument. Like, yes, the price of comics is driving away readership, and it's hurting the local retailer. Is that a problem? Absolutely. We live in an era where comics, the publishers no longer have a dedication towards a brick and mortar retail store. There's multiple avenues for them to put out their books. And it baffles me. And this, I realize I'm a staunch liberal, and I probably have a different way of thinking about things, but it baffles me how the people that claim to prop up the free market will then turn around and say, no, the publishers have a duty to a avenue of outreach, to an avenue of retail, to make sure that it thrives. That is insane to me. To me, it's incumbent on the local comic shop or the retailer to ensure that they can move their product. And Marvel and DC and Image arguably no longer have a direct line to promoting going into a comic shop. I mean, we have digital, we have television. I mean, we all talk about the movies and the shows that they put out regularly. They're moving content, and that there is so if you're an independent comics store owner, you're going to have to adapt to survive. If you don't, you're going to go out of business. That's literally the free market. And so for this conservative value movement to claim that they are doing that while also asserting that the publisher has a duty to ensure that these local retailers stay in business is asinine. If you continue to follow an outdated model, you're going to go out of business. Then again, you have stores all over the place that are doing new things, where They're getting out into the community. They're dedicating themselves to the local library system. They're going to things that don't involve comics, and they're injecting comics into them, and they're thriving. It's an evolution of the industry. At the same token, if you want to talk about the comics dedication to their readership, it's not like that there is not an abundance of comics on the shelf. My biggest problem right now is not that I can't find comics to read. It's that there are so many good books coming out that I can't afford them all. And that would be true if it was $4.99 a comic or 99 cents a comic, because literally I get a preview magazine every month with hundreds of books that I want to read but can't, because I don't have the time and I don't have the money, and because I'm an adult and I have things to go out and do. We are not lacking for quality material to read, and this is true in any political sphere. There are plenty of books that satisfy my uber Marxist liberalism queer-coded self, and there are books written by people who are staunch conservatives who just want to write stories that cannot be seen as analogs for anything else. My opinion is they're boring. That's why I don't read them, but they're there. And also if you're reading your comics for some weird smutty sexual hijinks, there's
plenty of those.
Yeah, Boundless Comics is that they have 8 pages in this month's previews. Like, what you're not at a loss.
And then go 30 pages later and you'll find Zenoscope.
Exactly. Yeah. These things, you're not missing them. And then lastly, my point from the creatorship, there are plenty of conservatives still working in comics. There are plenty of, I know, Bill, you spoke on somebody who is it's pretty staunch conservative, but doesn't say a lot. There are plenty of outspoken conservatives that still are very, very much a part of the comic sphere. They don't confuse conservatism with bigotry.
Yeah.
And
I mean, a perfect example of that, I think, is Bill Willingham.
Exactly. Well, Bill Willingham. Yeah. Tom King. Tom King is a conservative. And he's writing I don't want to cuss. He's writing Batman right now. He's a very religious individual. He's he used to work for the CIA. He's a gun rights person. He's a gun sense person, but he's also a gun rights person. He's a conservative. He's writing the biggest book in comics right now. He's not an asshole, and that's the difference.
I mean, yeah, seriously, the numbers from October just came out. Both Batman issues were in the top 10 bestsellers.
Or Mr. Miracle.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
he is not a snowflake. The man worked for the CIA. We are not at a loss for conservative-minded people. We are at a loss. So inherently, comics, and you guys know this probably better than I do, but comics are a medium of. It's not a solo medium. It's not something that you largely do by yourself. It takes a group. It takes a letterer. It takes an inker, a colorist, an artist, and a writer. It's a medium of committee. And if you, through social media or some other outpoint, have driven away through your attitude so many people that they don't want to work with you, then that's not censorship. That's something you've done to yourself. And Ethan Van Sciver is a perfect example. And I don't think you can talk about Comicsgate without listing him, because he's one of the biggest voices. And if you look at his history, he's put himself out there as just an abrasive figure all around. He used to go on Word Balloon all the time and talk, and he'd come in and he'd play his weird keyboarded awkward romance, and then he started just being a grating individual. This is the same thing that's happened to him at conventions. It's the same thing that's happened to him in the comics medium. It's the same thing that his peers, not fans, but peers, they think about him. Robert Venditti, who was writing Green Lantern that EVS was doing all of these covers for, is great about promoting all people who are doing variant covers, anything else. He wouldn't share his stuff because you're a douchebag. Essentially stifling his own monetary flow. You look at other creators. Aaron Cooter told DC to take his name off of a book because he wasn't interested in being associated with somebody who was just such an unlikable figure, somebody who was so insensitive, who lacked a direct form of empathy.
Yeah, and the last time I can think of that happening was the Orson Scott Card Superman story. That's the last time I heard anything like that happening. EVS is he's a Jersey boy, and he used to be a presence at some of the local cons. A couple of years ago, and this stems from Word Balloon, where he presented some opinions about the Rosenbergs, the couple that were executed for treason in the 50s over Russian secrets and Russian espionage. And I have a particular knowledge about that subject, and I had a really interesting conversation with Ethan about that. Certainly coming from different political standpoints, but it was respectful and it was informed. I don't think that person is there anymore. I think that person that is in that body now is just consumed with the finger pointing and the trolling and degrading people.
I think he was swallowed by the anonymity of the internet.
Yep.
So if you get Ethan in person, and I'm saying this, I've never actually met the man. I respect him as a human being, and that's about as far as I'm going to go. But if you get him in person, and I say this because I've seen interviews with him and Mark Wade, which is a figure that I'm sure we're going to talk about here in a little bit.
Yeah.
But I've seen them do a panel together. I've seen them have a discussion, and it is calm. It is rational. It is two people talking to each other, and then that person walks away and sits behind a computer and becomes a totally different individual because he's safe in the anonymity of the internet. And I think what you're seeing now with the uprise of Comicsgate and the blowback against Comicsgate, just the sheer force of it, the anonymity of the internet can't save you in a niche market to where you're a very visible figure.
Yeah.
It's not an excuse, especially in an artistic community, which is, I'm sorry, art and literature. You know, I'm a writer. Art and literature are built on empathy. If you lack it, you're not going to do well.
Empathy, and to use like one of their bad words, diversity. I mean, if everybody had the exact same experience or a very similar experience, the art would be just generic white bread, and nobody would buy it. After a certain amount, hey, I've already read it, I've already experienced it. Your art is just the same as that person's art is just the same as that person's art. Art is successful when it's something new, when it's something different, or if it brings something that's well known out to a different light, puts it in a different perspective, changes things up a little bit every so often, gets people talking about it. And I what you said, Caleb, about anonymity, I don't think that anonymity really works, at least anymore. I would say maybe in probably the past 10 years, as people have become a little bit more savvy about who people are, unmasking people who are, just spewing hate or spewing garbage or whatever on forums. And in the age of doxing, which, is going to be something that we might bring up a little bit later on, it's easy to be extremely visible, whether you want to be or not. And EDS has not been shy about being visible in this. And, it's possible that once you go down the troll bridge far enough, you don't really know how to stop being a troll, how to stop being negative, how to stop, taking on all these crazy, disparate arguments and kind of mushing them all together to come up with some kind of justification for your feelings or your words or your actions. And so he's absorbed just as much as what Comicsgate has been throwing out, whether he, was one of the people starting it or, if he'll end up being one of the people, at the end of it. It doesn't really matter at this point. He's just part of it. And no matter what kind of viewpoint has been taken, no matter how vile or even reasonable, like we talked about with the price point on books and, whether or not a publisher has any interest in supporting these brick and mortar stores. That's a valid argument. That's something you can have very civilly, but to smush it together with, I don't want any trans people writing books because, that's gross. I don't like trans people. It really shouldn't be glommed together, but it is. It's really just turned into this sort of mass mushy movement of, I don't like XYZ, therefore it's all bad.
Yeah, well, essentially you're finding the most convenient scapegoat for an otherwise recognizable problem. Because if you look at the print industry in general, comic stores are some of the few, like they're kind of the last vestige of independent brick and mortar literature providers. Independent bookstores have closed. They're all selling used stuff now. There's no, in the age of Amazon, in the age of Barnes and Noble, which is having its own trouble, independent bookstores are relatively non-existent. I live in Little Rock, Arkansas. I think we have one store in the entire metropolitan area, in the largest metropolitan city in the state, that sells books that's not like a used bookstore.
Yeah. Even in Princeton, even in a college town like Princeton, there is one bookstore that you cannot classify as a used store.
Exactly. Yeah. And yet we in Little Rock have 3 comic book stores between in the metro area. We have one in Little Rock, and we have 2, and one in North Little Rock and one in Sherwood. In a relatively a 5-mile radius, you have 3 comic book stores in a place that there's no independently owned prose bookstores. The print industry is having issues because it's so readily available. And so to see those problems, even in an industry, a niche industry that's been relatively safeguarded against it, and then still to decide, well, fuck, it's because of the gays, or black people writing comics, or those women with their weird vagina monologues, to decide that they're the reason it's failing. That's some cognitive dissonance that I just don't know what to do with. It's based out of fear, and it's based out of hate. And at the end of the day, and I'm willing to say this for me, I'm not willing to say anybody else, but I honestly think Comicsgate at this point is a hate movement.
Oh, I don't think that's an unfair description at all.
And that kind of what's really interesting is that, since I've been reading a lot of tweets from people who are, nominal supporters of Comicsgate in very tangential ways, it seems very strange that they would want to associate themselves to that movement. And it still seems that there are people who claim to be supporters of Comicsgate who are still concerned about the base issue of, comic book stores and the industry dying, and what can we do to support and bolster this industry to make sure that something that I love, comics and reading comics and or collecting comics, can continue. But again, because the movement itself has been just turned into this massive mushy pile of how much garbage and hate can we throw at people that we don't like, or that we want to scapegoat for every ill, whether it's the store's fates or whether it's I can't sell my shitty big booby lady drawings to DC because apparently they don't like white dudes. I mean, there's a lot of I think the confusion of it just basically made it so that even people who are like, hey, that point right there makes sense, they're tainted by it. And I feel bad for people who may not really care to follow all of the negative aspects of it, but unfortunately by pushing up the movement and spreading the word are essentially complicit. And I kind of suck.
We had mentioned Ethan Van Sciver. I briefly want to bring up, and because this gentleman, and I use that just as a descriptive, as a polite Northeasterner, one commentator who has had some, oh God, I really don't want to say prominence, but I'll say prominence, what the hell. Richard C. Meyer, who has a YouTube channel known as Diversity and Comics, has been at the center of a lot of this stuff. One thing I'll say is, I briefly had a bizarre fascination in the early days of radio with Glenn Beck. Not that I believed a single piece of shit that was coming out of his mouth, but he had an entertaining, well-produced show. Have you guys ever watched a Diversity in Comics YouTube video?
Yes.
I can't make it through a couple
seconds. I have made it through maybe 2.
I've made it through a handful more than those, simply because I'd heard things about this individual, and we get claimed, we get told that we're closed-minded all the time. So I wanted to take the extra step and say, hey, let's give this guy the benefit of the doubt. Let's see what he's going. He is to me, and I'm going to steal a phrase from I'm going to paraphrase Jason Wood from the 11 O'Clock Comics, and I hope he doesn't mind. But Richard C. Meyer is one of the worst kind of bigots, because he guards his words so closely that he gives himself an out, knowing that he has an audience who will do his dirty work for him. Mm-hmm. I've watched these Diversity in Comics videos. I've seen what he does. I've seen as he hides behind, again, the anonymity of the internet, using his weird hand gestures to rip apart creators, most of which the creators that he decides that he wants to quote unquote critique, and I say that because I don't think you can call what he does criticism, are women, are people of color, are queer writers, are people who have came out publicly against him, that he just so happens to find something wrong with his comics. The production value is shit. He shoots them to the point that we've even had a major celebrity comedian lambast him and make fun of him in an ironic way on a very public forum. The dude hides in his closet and shoots videos with his camera phone talking about how black people and homos are bad because of little boobied women in his comic books. Like that's, and what I just said sounds stupid because it is. There's no value. There's no criticism. He's not, the extent of his comic criticism goes to, this is bad, I didn't like it, this is bad. He's not critiquing the art. He's not critiquing the writing. He's not showing you where they came from or where it's going. He's not discussing the predecessors of the medium or what it's doing to further the medium. It's just like angry fanboy non-logic.
Well, even is it really fanboy? And here's where, and this is I think kind of part of the I think part of what a lot of the leaders, or at least the main vocal personalities of the alt-right movement, kind of have in mind when they put themselves out there and make videos like this, or write articles, or really try to push their own opinion out there to as many people as possible. It's kind of a form of self-promotion. It's using negative, anything negative he can say in a very strongly worded way to a particular audience that's going to, he knows, broadcast that message on a wider scale. It's basically self-promotion to a point, using negative publicity as the only type of publicity. And I think that kind of is part and parcel of what this whole frickin' lawsuit is about, that I think we can probably bring up now that we're starting to talk about Richard Meyer, about his blown deal with the Antarctic Press for his comics. And he, as a lot of people who tend to try to make a big name for himself, he, of course, had something that he wanted to sell, and that was, what was the name of the book again? Something about a... Jawbreakers. That's what it was.
He and John Malin put it.
Yeah.
Who has gotten into his own soup over some just baffling comments about the X-Men.
If he was trying to promote a book, get his name out there, get his name in front of a lot of people that potentially could be customers, people who would buy his book or support his bid to get something published. The best way to do it is to promote yourself very strongly. Get your name in front of a lot of people. Attach yourself to something kind of popular, or something that's maybe controversial, in order to get more people talking about you, mentioning your name, mentioning the name of your property that you want to get off the ground when they're talking about you. That probably would have worked if maybe what he was talking about was a lot less divisive, hateful, maybe not necessarily actionable, except in maybe the actions and consequences of what he was saying, and what was happening to the people that he was criticizing, quote unquote, or deriding in his diversity in comics speeches. It came back to him negatively. Sometimes when you exercise your free speech in a free society, or in a market-driven society, or a market-driven industry, it can come back with bad consequences, not necessarily good consequences. So potentially the cachet that he thought he had with how well known he was among the Comicsgate followers, who either because of what he was saying in Diversity in Comics or just like, hey, I know who that guy is, I'll totally buy anything that he's selling me. When Antarctic Press went to go pick it up and publish it because, hey, here's some guy who's got a name for himself, apparently. And who is the publisher again? The gentleman who...
Antarctic Press?
Yeah, well, the gentleman who...
Is that Ben Dunn's imprint?
Is it Ben Dunn?
I think it's Ben Dunn's, yeah.
You know, he probably didn't do a ton of legwork on social media to see exactly why he was well known.
You also have to say with this particular imprint, they've published egregious tits and ass comics.
Yeah.
They have published at the same time Strangers in Paradise.
Yeah,
they have published arguably pro-Trump satire books and definitively anti-Trump satire books. This is not an imprint that has an agenda that it follows closely. It's very much image bait.
Yeah, and they really position themselves as a supporter of independent creators that want to get something out there that maybe don't have another possible avenue. And a publisher, of course, has to be somewhat picky sometimes, because obviously money/resources are limited. But, in this case, he probably liked what he saw in the Jawbreakers ash can or whatever treatment that he was provided, and was like, yeah, sure, let's put this out there. This guy apparently has a name. Some people know who this guy is, and, so we'll sell some books.
And it's done by John Malin, who's no stranger to the comics industry.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. There's another name there that somebody can actually say, oh, I know who that is. Yeah, somebody will buy this. They're not going to buy 50,000 issues, but they might buy more than 1,000 issues, maybe. And that, unfortunately, kind of led to this whole mess with Mark Waid, in that he took it upon himself to let Ben know exactly what Richard Meyer is famous for. And but apparently that was not the first inkling that Antarctic Press had gotten, that there was something wrong with their choice to put out Jawbreakers. Oh no,
within the first hour they got flooded. They got flooded with people saying, are you kidding? Like, seriously?
Yeah, they were like, this is not, they were basically saying, hey, Richard Meyer's not the guy you want to be proud to publish. Like, this is not somebody that you want to publish. And Mark didn't have to, call up the guy, but apparently he knew him. I'm not sure if he's done business with him before, but just basically said, hey, the reason why everybody's shitting all over you is because Richard Meyer has these viewpoints, and they're all very visibly published and easy for anybody to look up and see and listen to and hear and read. Just to kind of let you know, give you a heads up, this is the kind of person you're getting in bed with.
Well, and from their own PR spokesperson's admission, they had already made the decision to not go through with this before they tapped into that voicemail that was left, because it was a voicemail that Mark Waid left for them, and they had apparently already decided, because of the amount, the high volume of people coming through and saying, like, no, like, don't give these individuals the credibility, like, these are, like, look what they're doing. And it's because of a history of harassment online, and I think that's the one thing we haven't really tapped into as much yet. These people, like, there are, I think, 57,000 followers of Richard C. Meyer on YouTube. Some of those are bot accounts, not all of them. So he still has,
and some are journalists as well.
Some are journalists
as well. He signals people to go after these, people who use the anonymity of the internet, who are these troll accounts. They don't use their real names. They use fake names. They use fake pictures, or a lot of times it's weird anime pictures, or even Pepe the Frog pictures, or whatever. They go on there and they just send these despicable messages, just in high volumes, to people like Mags Zaggio, and they say despicable transphobic things, or they say they take a person of color like Daryl Ayo, who's an independent comics creator, and they just send him racial slurs over and over. The dude does a free web comic and is as far as industry terms a threat to no one. He just likes to make his own comics, and they just try to put him out because he wants to. He dares to have a voice.
Yeah.
And that's a lot what it is.
And many times these are people that have absolutely zero to minimal creative content influence, assistant editors and colorists. Yeah.
And so for Mark Waid to do this, and look, the three of us are all we're pretty tapped into comics culture, I would say. We're not naive. We're not dumb. We realize that Mark Waid has never met a soapbox he didn't want to stand on.
Right. He's a very divisive figure.
He absolutely is. We all have our opinions on him.
Many ways, yes.
But I will say this about the guy, whether he was doing it for his own version of notoriety or whether he was doing it because of some push to be I hate the phrase, but a quote unquote white knight for people who are continually look as a gay dude. Like I'm not a snowflake. I'm a 5'10", 240-pound muscle bound gay dude who can probably bench press you and throw you across the room. I can handle my own. Every once in a while, I don't mind when my straight friends say, "Hey, like time out. Let me take this one because you've had enough." And if that was what Mark Waid was doing, good for him. Because at this point in time, very few other creators who were not people being personally attacked by the weird troll army of Richard C. Meyer and Ethan Van Sciver and a few others, they were the only ones commenting. And as a person who is in that part of the Twitter sphere, I was seeing it, and I was seeing these people saying, "Hey, like, why is no one talking about this? What are you guys doing? Like, hey," and they were tagging people like you see this is happening and you have clout. Why aren't you saying anything? And there weren't. And then, Mark Waid stepped up and did. And so whether he was doing that for his personal reasons or for his own notoriety or to just because, again, he's never met a soapbox he didn't want to be best friends with, I don't care because at least he said something.
Mm-hmm. And I think also the timing, which is probably going to be one of the main issues in this lawsuit, that, of course, Richard C. Meyer, after Antarctic announced that they were going to be canceling the publication contract that they had come up with for Jawbreakers. And Mark Waid was not shy about saying that he had also mentioned that, he had gone to Antarctic Press and said, like, hey, just so you know, the reason why all these people are saying, please don't publish this is, probably all the same stuff that they're already telling you. But, hey, I'm telling you as another professional that, hey, this is not, it's not just fans. It's not just randos on the internet. It's also, other creators too. Whether he should have stood out and said something, given his name to, in support of a lot of other people who also didn't want this, whatever. But
when there are defamation claims with people like Meyer, it's basically don't repeat back what I said. So
exactly.
That's very easily dismissed. When you get the tortious interference claim, then there is an argument.
Yeah, and that's actually, I think, where,
given that this is somebody who has prominence in the industry and the representations that appeared online as this was happening.
Exactly. And I think that's where the main part of the lawsuit, which of course he's doing, Richard Meyer is suing in Texas. He's suing Mark Waid for damages based on defamation and tortious interference, which is basically what Mark Waid did lost Richard this contract. That if Mark had not stepped in and, as a white knight or as a concerned citizen and mentioned something to Antarctic Press, then Richard would still have his contract to publish the book, which Antarctic Press has come out and said, no, that's not the case. Mark Waid was just one of many voices. In fact, he was one of the later voices. We had already made this decision or had already been talking about dumping this guy anyway. But because Mark Waid is a known person and that name is known, and he mentioned that he also said something, Richard Meyer has a target. Because how many other people are named as people who have complained about Antarctic Press publishing the book? But Mark Waid, here's a name, he's a professional, and he put his support behind, or not even supporting, basically just said, well, I just told him that the guy's an asshole. And that explains why all these people are throwing, are throwing dog bags full of feces, flaming bags of feces on your porch because.
Well, they're also throwing money toward the two individuals in the suit as well.
Exactly. That came after,
which is new terrain, pretty much, at least for comics.
Yeah, we live in the world of Kickstarter campaigns now, or GoFundMes.
It's amazing some of the dollar amounts that some of the people that have been aligned with Comicsgate have garnered.
Well,
but I also see that it's a fan base that doesn't really exist. I think we had a perfectly vibrant example of that on the left. If you remember the first Dixie Chicks album that came out post-Bush controversy, and there were people who bought 5-6 copies and never opened them. I wouldn't look to the numbers that people like the Brightwisers or Ethan Van Sciver or Vox Day with Chuck Dixon, the money that they're gathering is really indicative of the level of the audience.
Yeah.
Also, I just want to point out on that note, the campaigns that they did, that they raised these the monies through, were not Kickstarters, which means they were not backed by a goal. They were Indiegogo accounts, from at least what I've seen, which means that even if you don't meet your goal, you consume that money anyway. One of the things about Indiegogo and Kickstarter and everything else is you can see the number of donors. Mm-hmm. And you can use that by basic elementary division to find out how much the average person gave, or this, that, and the other. There for a hot minute, they got larger and larger and larger because it was a little bit of an incestuous relationship. It was one person succeeded in their Indiegogo thing and then took that money and fed it back into another Comicsgate Indiegogo, and then who took that money and fed it back into another Comicsgate Indiegogo, and it just built on itself, and then they could proclaim these massive monetary influences as they just took in all the money. But basic arithmetic doesn't lie. And you can see how you can see where that money is coming from and where that money is going. Now you can actually see where that money has stopped because the grifting worked, mm-hmm. and the few individuals who were going to benefit from this did benefit from this, and they stopped sharing that funding. And if you, I forget who it was on Twitter, another individual actually compiled all of those numbers and mm-hmm. and put it into a database, and they showed the chart of how it's now peaked and it's deadlined. Yeah. How that money is no longer coming in. Mm-hmm. And part of that is because you have things like actual costs, like lawsuits that you have to pay for, that you're like, oh no, this is real world stuff. I'm not going to give you my money.
Yeah. Well, and also, like, if you were to look at, say, the launch campaign, or the money that was raised, and this might actually go against Richard Meyer. I don't know if that's something that Mark Wade's lawyer, Mark Zaid.
Mark Zaid. I'll have to say that Mark Zaid is a very good attorney.
Yeah.
This was not a name that was unfamiliar to me.
But I'm sure this is something that he thought about, and that he might bring up in the lawsuit. What Richard Meyer potentially could have gotten from Antarctic Press publishing of this book is probably just a tiny wisp in comparison to what he was able to garner through his campaign to get money. And this is before the lawsuit. So, because I think the rate, and Caleb, I'm not sure if I saw the same accounting, but someone had actually run some numbers, because I think the book itself, if you wanted to support the book and actually get a copy of an issue, it was $25. So $25 to get one issue of a comic that may or may not come out.
That was some of the similar accounting I'd seen, and you should also note that this was a 48-page graphic novel, and mm-hmm. yes, those two words were put beside one another for the purposes of bringing in income. A 48-page graphic novel. At least it was full color. I mean, throw them. Yeah, at least it was full color.
So, and that's the thing. Like, if he does get this out to his supporters, well, that's great. But I'm sure there's a lot of additional money on that
I think we're straying a little bit too far from some of the other topics we need to talk about.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah. So suffice to say, obviously the lawsuit is going back and forth. Mark Waid just posted something to say that it can't be defamation because it was all true.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, Meyer's been deleting, or at least trying to delete and erase all of his previous tweets that could be used to support that information that, he has said very horrible, inflammatory, and terrible things, and, supported harassment of other people, that kind of thing. So, which of course, nothing on the internet is deletable. Everything's forever if you put it out there. So, all that's going to be reviewed, or going to have to be reviewed by the court in Texas anyway. So
there's also, I feel, with some of these creators, you have two tracks with the creators that have aligned themselves with this movement. You have the stalwarts, and I hate to use the word has-beens, but you have the stalwarts that are no longer working within the mainstream industry, and you also have people that have never hit it. Now, Caleb and I are both writers. Nothing would have pleased me more if after the first issue of the Crime Fighter Inquiry came out that I got a call from DC the next week and they said, come join us and write Happy Nightwing team-up stories. Nothing would have been greater.
I still have faith.
Caleb, I'm sure you have this wish that you get a call from Marvel and say, help us fix Bruce Banner.
Yes. Well, I don't. That's an issue for another podcast.
But yes, we would love to hear stuff like this. I wonder how much of certain creators' alignments with a movement that's passing. I fear that there are some creators who otherwise would not have been swept up in this. Caleb, I think you have one particular story. I don't know if you want to name names, but I know there's people that this has happened to.
Yeah. So there's a few stories, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I don't know if naming names is the right move. I can say that without naming names. So I'm actually pretty good friends with a writer named Justin Jordan. You've seen a lot of his work from DC. He's doing the New Age of Heroes stuff and then his Image stuff. He produced an Image comic with a new writer. That was great. It's called The Death of Love. It was fantastic that he did with, I should say, a new artist. After the book did well, and this guy had made he had his foot in the door. And then kind of tanked his career because he saw the Indiegogo money coming in. Mm-hmm. And just put out some really, really obscene tweets that made no sense whatsoever. And that to me is pretty indicative of what is happening with this movement. Like you said, you have some folks who have their own platform. They've got a history in the medium, and maybe things weren't going so well for them. And then you've got a whole new breed of people who are I'm going to say want to be artists. I don't mean this as saying wannabes, because some of them are actually fantastic artists. Mm-hmm. I'd actually the artist that I'm talking about, I'd actually reached out to him because I'm friends with Justin and said, hey, like if we can figure, which by the way, I still haven't figured out Skype on my end of the podcast thing, so this is not going to happen anyway. But said, hey, like, would you consider coming and talking on my podcast for it? So yeah, I'd reached out to this dude, and then he just decided to shoot his career in the foot by just being really, really misogynist. And you see that from all across the board. You mentioned the Brightwisers earlier. I live in Little Rock. It's the same town that the Brightwisers live in. Mm-hmm. Comics are a small circle. In some way, I'm acquainted with the Brightwisers. We've been to dinner together. We are constantly at similar events. I've seen Mitch working on his Red Rooster campaign for years. Super happy that he was getting ready to put it out. It sucks that he decided to align himself with this mentality. Now, I should say for Mitch, Mitch used to work on the Captain America books, and part of some of his hurt feelings are the fact that he no longer had a functioning career with Marvel, that he did his mm-hmm. bid and they quit calling him back, which happens to a lot of freelancers. That's unfortunately the dark side of the freelancer nature of the business, is that sometimes you get to jump in and you get tossed right back out. Mm-hmm. He's an okay artist, but they quit calling him years before you know, he was doing the Brubaker stuff. They quit calling him a long time before Trumpism ever came around. And so for him to also turn around and say, hey, no, it was my support for me, it was my conservatism and my support for Donald Trump that really cost me my job and this, that, and the other, really disingenuous. And it's flat out untrue. I mean, you know, timelines don't lie. We can see the last thing that he got work on, and then we can see where he also put out a picture and a piece of art that he did when he finally put it out of, I think it was the night before the election of Donald Trump, and that he's now claiming sank his career. And it's not true. And then he aligned himself with, again, people who are consistently and constantly putting out racist, homophobic, misogynistic diatribes. And you know what? You know what really sucks is it didn't really hurt his career, because now he's going to put out his Red Rooster book, and we've talked about the money through the Indiegogo campaigns, and as far as I know, it's been funded really well. And if it does well, you know, congratulations. There's no, like, I'm not mad that these people are putting out comics. Just leave people alone. If you're going to put out your comics, don't yuck on somebody else's yum. Don't stamp out somebody else's persona or identity to promote yourself. And by doing that,
and don't support others in doing that.
Right.
Don't hitch your wagon to people who are spending just inordinate amounts of time just shitting on other people, because that then implies you. It implicates you as one of those people, whether you're actively stating, you know, the same kind of things that these other people are spewing out there, that they're harassing people with, you know, messages and email. Well, not so much emails, but the messages and the posts and the you know, doxing at the house and you know, of personal information all online, personal threats. I mean, there are a lot of threats that come out there of bodily harm and or financial ruin, you know, things like that.
And that happened to the Brettweisers, according to them. And I'm inclined to believe them, that they said they received threats, and that's why they decided not to go to a con. But I just want to throw this out there. You're right. It's not only that it hurt his career, or if it did hurt his career, it definitely affected his wife's career. Betty is a Eisner, if I'm not mistaken, an Eisner award-winning colorist. She's done amazing work on a variety of stuff. The people that she is doing this award-winning comics with no longer wish to be associated with her because of her husband's association to people like Richard C. Meyer and Ethan Van Sciver. And it's not because of any type of censorship. It's because they don't want their name tied to people who are essentially the Ku Klux Klan version of comics. And that means something. And these people, you know, it's not hard to figure out who I'm talking about when I talk about Betty Brettweiser. The writer and the artist of these comics are also not by any means flag waving liberals. They write books called Criminal for a reason. You know, they write these arguably right-leaning cop dramas, some of which have strong female protagonists, but which are very pro-gun, which are very pro-protect yourself, which are these really kind of noir stories. Yeah, they don't have books where people are marching down the street with rainbow flags. And those people no longer wish to be associated with, again, a person who I consider to be one of the top colorists potentially in the industry. You know, you sank your wife's career on some level, dude. Like, was your dedication to Trumpism or your quiet, passive-aggressive placation of bigots worth it? Was it? Because I can't see how it was. What for your 80,000 Indiegogo dollars? What are you going to do next year?
And something that we haven't really gone into detail has been the harassment. And you've mentioned that there is a counter to it. There is a left-wing counter to it.
Oh, for sure.
It tends to be a bit more organized, though, and a bit more sensible. If this person is at this con, I'm not going to appear. Not saying that they can't appear. They're going to block this person from me at the con, but I'm just not going there. And sometimes that works as enough of a threat. You do find that a lot, and you do hear a lot of stories like that. But some of the over the top. To me, the most sickening one was what happened with Marcia Cook.
Absolutely.
Marcia Cook is Darwin Cook's widow, and there were a number of posts. I think because Darwin Cook's, his creative style was very much reminiscent of another age, of a simpler time. And a lot of people that have aligned themselves with Comicsgate have somehow adopted Cook as somebody who would have been involved in the movement if he had not passed away. And Marcia Cook, within minutes, said, oh, no, there's no way that would be the case. And the vitriol that she encountered within minutes, sickening. It was absolutely sickening.
And I should say that vitriol did not just come from faceless names on the internet. Ethan Van Sciver himself tweeted out something along the lines of, "Oh, it's sad that you guys are now using her as a shield," to a fight that he started.
Yeah.
And that was and no one was using Marcia Cook as a shield. Marcia Cook is no one's shield. She is a Spitfire of her own. She's every bit the Spitfire that her husband was. And if you're in comics, you know that Darwin was not to be trifled with. He was a firecracker.
Yeah.
And I think that's largely why they thought that they could co-opt it. Straight, white, male, that would not hesitate to punch a man.
Yeah.
And we all have those stories, and quite frankly, I love hearing them because they're great. So they thought they could co-opt
of certain editors being scared of him. Yeah, no, there's some really great stories.
Yeah, no, they're fantastic. That's the great part of comics. Make that movie. But so especially considering that he is now unfortunately gone and can't speak for himself, they thought they could co-opt him, and I don't think they knew who he was married to, because Marcia is a badass, and she took no prisoners with that, and these are people who, again, were Ethan Van Sciver's friends. They again, these are conservative people. Just because they are friends with people who are gay, people who are black, people who are women, or herself or is a woman, doesn't mean that they didn't have conservative leanings, which is what led them to have friendships with people like John Malin, Ethan Van Sciver, all the people, Chuck Dixon, the people that we've talked about. Mm-hmm. They had those relationships until they jumped the shark, so to speak, and went off to Crazy Town and into Breitbart beliefs. Mm-hmm. And that's where, fortunately, they decided to draw the line. And so she just didn't have it. It was this particular moment is kind of the impetus of what broke the dam, so to speak. It's what made Bill Sienkiewicz speak out. It's what made Jeff Lemire speak out. These titans of the industry. It's what got people to stop ignoring what was happening. It's what, it wasn't literally 2 blacklists of creators that got them to start talking. It wasn't 2 years worth of harassment that got them to come out against it. It was attacking a pillar of the industry's widow that got everyone. It prompted a Tom Taylor-esque or Tom Taylor-made viral tweet that went out. That's the move that really drove it home. And I would have thought that for a lot of people it would have erased any question of what the movement was. But I think now you have some people who are stepping in, trying to legitimize the movement, trying to say, hey, yes, there are some alt-right leanings to it, but let's really look at the things like censorship in comics, and let's look at the things like the $3.99, like that's hurting the industry. These other movements, and again, like Steve said earlier, those are valid points. They really are, and they should be discussed. We should have that conversation. We should have the conversation of how to prop up our local comic shops, who, in my opinion, are the cornerstone of the industry. And if we lose them, we're going to lose the industry in a lot of ways. But we should also, you can't ignore history. You can't ignore the facts. Like, it is what it is. And these things have been said, and the online harassment, you've called a trans woman a man in a wig. You've called Adam, I'm forgetting his last name, he's a comics Writer. You've dropped the F-bomb on him. Mm-hmm. you've sent people after Daryl Ayo and had them say things yourself. You put out your quote unquote dark roast that, by the way, is not gone just because you erased it. It's still there. Also, your Twitter account still there, just not because you purged it. Rich Dicky Boy, whatever you want to call yourself these days. It's there, and that history is there. And so if you're a person, and I'm saying this particularly to the new creators who might jump in and see this movement and see the numbers attached to it and think, hey, I can make a name for myself here. There's better ways, dude. And dudettes, if that's still a word because I'm old, there's better ways.
I think dudette is a pretty radical term, like tubular. I totally agree with that, and I think, and here's actually a serious question, and bringing up the fact that Tom Taylor and Jeff Lemire and a bunch of other very well-known names in the industry spoke up after what happened to Darwin Cook's widow. Would Comicsgate have become what it has become if very early on those same people had spoken up in defense of the smaller people who had been targets of harassment, to try and steer, whatever the original intention of Comicsgate, which at this point I think Comicsgate itself was always intended to, be this sort of, alt-right, media outreach. Do you think that it would have gotten as big or as problematic as it became? If, say, Jeff Lemire, like back in
yeah, well, the thing is, when you talk about that and the names of people that came out, I can't conceive of any of the people that you mentioned, the Tom Taylors and the Jeff Lemires and some people that you haven't mentioned, like the Gail Simones. I can't conceive that they wouldn't have held that belief before, that there was something that changed within them. So sometimes when you do have exposure for something, it is tied in with an apprehension to an extremist belief that there's a sense of something going too far. But I also think with the people that you've mentioned, I don't know, I don't think that the reaction, if it had come any earlier, would have been different. It just may be that was the point in the movie that happened. It happened at the 50-minute mark instead of the 30-minute mark. Yeah. I know I'm not phrasing this properly, but also, let's face it, this is comic books, and there are certain idiots that like something just because someone else doesn't. And
which I think throws back to the Gamergate movement and the fact that it was inherently a wind-up of trolls anyway. Yeah.
The other thing about Comicsgate, there's so many ridiculous paradoxes that just seem to go well over the heads of people. It's called a gate, and there's no real controversy that is basically tied around. You have guys who are making these ridiculous homophobic comments, and this is an industry that the basic bread and butter are men in spandex. It's just like the Proud Boys. You cannot tell me that at least 70% of the Proud Boys are not closeted queers. You can't tell me that.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's apps for it. I said it on Caleb's show that I can understand, somebody that is of a right-wing mentality of getting into a character like a Batman or a Punisher where it's a power fantasy. If you're a right-leaning X-Men fan, what in fuck have you been reading? It's not there.
Dissonance is real.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's some other examples that I can throw out, but it just seems to be these ironies that just seem to just not register with people that have aligned themselves with this movement. And how can you possibly say that it is not a hate movement when the very basis of its proclamation has been harassment and doxing?
Yeah.
How can you possibly say that?
So I want to address that real quick, because one of the things I constantly hear is a really unconvincing answer to that question, is that Comicsgate is a movement that has women in it, and it's a movement that has gay people in it, and it's a movement that has people of color in it. And that summarily, a lot of the argument comes back and is saying that people like us dismiss them as tokens, which they say is unfair. And you know what? I agree with it. I agree that that's not fair. It's not fair to dismiss those minority groups who are in Comicsgate as tokens. What it is a glaring identifier that their level of bigotry is so bland, its umbrella covers many segments. And we are all gay men on this podcast right now. We all know that gay men can be extremely misogynistic and gay men can be extremely racist. I know plenty. I see it all the time. And so I know this is going to come as a shock to a lot of people, but, sucking a dick every once in a while does not somehow magically mean that you can't be racist or you can't just think women need to go back where they came from.
Yeah.
In that same token, there are people of color who are also misogynistic and who are also extremely homophobic. Years and years of oppression based on their skin color has not somehow, again, magically meant that they magically separated them from the connotations of thinking that gay people don't have the right to exist, or that, again, women don't have their own autonomy. And white women elected Trump, so I don't know what else to say on that point. Being a member of a minority group does not it doesn't default you away from some type of intersectional oppression.
Yeah. I mean, that's actually one of the biggest things too. It's the old, well, I can't be racist because I have a black friend, or I can't be homophobic because hey, my cousin's trans, or something, or not homophobic, but I can't be transphobic because my cousin's trans. That kind of argument doesn't exonerate you from saying hateful things.
No,
or yeah, exactly. Or completely negate, the horrible things that you've said or even done in the past. I mean, yes, we live in a country where you are allowed to say whatever you want. There are consequences to that. The consequences aren't, the federal government coming down and slapping duct tape over your mouth and saying you can't say that. But if you're a comics creator and you spout this kind of stuff, people can tell you what they think about your speech by not buying your stuff, or by throwing it right back at you and saying, well, because you said those things, I think you are a horrible person.
Right.
And because it is wrong to say those things, and it is everybody's right to do so. I think a lot of the hurt fifis and why the whole snowflake ideal that used to be really thrown at liberals, because liberals are whiny crybabies, really makes more sense to be thrown at a lot of people who are very conservative in their views, and but at a moment's notice, at a challenge, just can only react by throwing massive insults or worse. And that's, or inciting campaigns of harassment, which is unfortunate, because again, there are people who get caught up in it because they see the dollar signs. They say, well, these other people are conservative and I'm conservative, so therefore I must, this must be good for me to also kind of glom onto. No, it doesn't. It's gone way past that.
I'm just thinking what you said. There's some adages that just stay with you all your life, and one for me was, as kids, the biggest bullies are also the biggest sissies. And yeah, you just illustrated that very effectively there.
He's the best of us.
Yeah.
Really.
Who? Me? No.
No, he's not. Well, look at this. We've had 3 gay men on the horn talking for over 90 minutes, and Noodles and Beef didn't come up once. Yay.
Oh, hey.
Shut up.
We all have.
Shut up.
We've all brought comics with us that we're going to talk about at length right now.
Anything else you guys want to add in relation to Comicsgate?
The only thing I'll say is, and it ties back to your question, Steve, as to would these things have happened if people had spoke up sooner. I don't know the answer to that question, but I've never shied away from being very blunt and putting my thoughts out there. And if you go on my Twitter page, one of the tweet I've got pinned at the top of my page says that I believe you have to call something by its name. Comicsgate is a hate group. They get by on harassing people based on homophobia, based on racism, based on misogyny, and based on really generic forms of bigotry. And I think it has to be verbalized. I'm from the South, so we have weird phrases like, mold grows in the dark, and I think that's true. If you don't bring the secrets out to life, if you let something like Comicsgate go long enough, it festers. And I think that's exactly what happened. I think it's what happened beyond Comicsgate. I mean, at the end of the day, this is a larger spotlight on a cultural shift that permeates throughout the Western culture, and it's not limited to a niche market like comics. It's not limited to America and our weird democracy and our issues. We see this globally as things are starting to happen and people are starting to gain recognition and given their own autonomy, so to speak. So when you see things, you got to speak out. When you see hate, don't wait for it to become such a monolithic thing that you have to fight it like a boss fight in a video game. Squash it out while it's small. And that's the only thing I have to say about it. It's just, it shouldn't have gotten to this point.
Yeah.
That you should listen to women when they say that they're being harassed online. You should listen to people of color. And I don't just mean black people. I mean, you should listen to people who are from East Asia. You should listen to the Greg Poks of the world as they say, hey, this stuff is really happening. You should listen to the Latinos, the Eric Escovels of the world when he says, no, this stuff is really going on. You should listen to the Mags Visagios and the Tamara Bonvillains. You should listen to the gay men that you're listening to right now when they say, hey, no, this shit's real. And if you do have some vestige of privilege and any kind of self-respect for your friends, then you speak up.
100%.
Anything else, or we want to wrap it up?
We got 5 more hours, right?
Yep, exactly.
We might have 5 more hours, but we don't have 5 more hours of recording space, so we're going to wrap this one up. And when we wrap an episode of the Comic Book Bears up, we do so with a segment we call the Woofs of the Week segment, where we spotlight anything, be it a comic book or a film or a TV program, a charitable initiative, anything under the sun that we think you, fair listener, will enjoy sampling. We're nothing if not gracious to our guests, so Caleb, you're going to go first. What is your Woof of the Week?
My Woof of the Week is a comic that I actually missed the first issue of, heard how amazing it was, and have had to go back and read it. And I just mentioned this creator a while ago. It's Border Town by Eric M. Esquivel. It's phenomenal. It is timely, and it's got really cool Mexican folklore. So go check it out. It's got monsters. It's if you want something that has an homage to politics, then it's your jam. If somehow you're a comic skater and you've made it through this podcast, then it's not for you, and that's okay. But yeah, the comic Border Town is lovely, amazing art, great story. My podcast partner, Craig, is in love with this so much that he broke my heart by cosplaying one of the characters. So he joined the Legion of Evil cosplayers. Yeah, check it out. It's a lot of fun. I think you're really going to dig it.
Steve and I both can definitely agree with you on that. Let's go over to Steve. Steve, what is your Woof of the Week?
Well, it won't surprise anybody that I want to talk about a TV show. Because there's been a lot of great comics I've read this week, and some of them over the past couple of weeks, some of them were actually recommended off your show, Caleb, and those are the Ahoy comics that I've been reading. I'm extremely excited to find some Captain Gingers because they have been sorely missing from the shelves. So I've reordered them. Yeah, Wrong Earth Alone, High Heaven, those things. I'm loving everything so far that they've put out. So yeah, I've actually gone and ordered everything that they have, and put in my subs for my LCS. But anyway, what I'm actually going to be talking about is Legacies, which is not something that I thought that I would like. In fact, I would have thought the opposite. I would have run screaming through the hills for yet another CW vampire woo-woo romance knockoff series. That's it's actually the sequel series to both Vampire Diaries and the originals.
Vampire Diaries and the originals are connected?
Yeah, Vampire Diaries is the main series. The originals actually show up as villains. Some of those people show up as villains in the Vampire Diaries. Some of those characters then carry over. Once Vampire Diaries ended, some of those people showed up in Originals. Now Originals has ended, and now it's Legacies. Now,
Okay. I gotta say, with the CW shows, if it's really doomed, those are the ones I'll watch, like Star-Crossed and the Tomorrow People.
oh
I
yeah.
haven't really hit the long-running ones, so I did not know that they were connected.
Oh yeah, yeah. And what's funny is that I have not watched a single episode of Vampire Diaries since season 1, when I realized that it was just a soap opera with vampires and werewolves. So I just out of fun or possible spite or curiosity, I started watching episode 1 and did not stop it going on to episode 2 and 3. It is about a school, the Salvatore School, named after the characters from the first Vampire Diaries series, that houses just what looks to be about 100 or 200 kids. It's a boarding school for witches, werewolves, and other supernatural beings, vampires, children. So it's a full boarding school with primary school kids up to high school kids and a little bit beyond, where they're trying to learn how to use their powers and just kind of make it in the world secretly as vampires, werewolves, witches, etc. It's actually really good. It's like Harry Potter meets Supernatural in essence. And I was just expecting it to just be like romances and a bunch of like backbiting, Pretty Little Liars kind of stuff. But in the second episode, they fought a dragon. That was not bad special effects dragon. There's a lot of really cool stuff in it, and I was shocked that I actually got into some of the characters. Now, yes, keep in mind it's a CW show, and there's teenagers involved, so of course there's a lot of like weirdy like. I'm just going to like not tell you that something's bothering me, but it's totally bothering me, and I will hate you forever kind of garbage going on in the background. But the monsters are cool, the effects are cool, and the whole concept actually really works. So, Legacies.
Well, for my wolf of the week, I'm focused on Gate. We are in a climate in the media where there's a lot of focus on the Watergate break-in and its obvious parallels to certain controversies involving the present administration. History Channel is broadcasting a new docu-series called Watergate, which covers the events. The interview segments are fantastic. The reenactment segments are god-awful. That's not my wolf. But what I think people should do, if they want to know about what took down President Nixon, go back to the source book. I started reading this again, and it is probably the single greatest example of reportage ever. And that's All the President's Men, written by Carl Bernstein and Bob Woodward. It's still in print. You can get it in Amazon for only $14.99 or something for a paperback that's still in print, and naturally they have the digital options. It's amazing how vibrant and effective the writing still is. I don't think there are many examples of journalistic collections that are over 40 years old that would have this impact to a reader in the present day. So that's my recommendation. That's my wolf of the week, All the President's Men from 1974.
That's a damn good one.
Yep. Growing up, I thought at some point this would be requisite reading in high schools. Certainly for journalism classes, but I just thought in history classes in general. And I remember my parents telling me that before I was old enough to remember that in '73 I was actually watching some of the hearings as a little kid, and I have no recollection of it, but maybe there was absorption, and that's why I've always had a fascination with some of the dark underpinnings of the '70s, like Watergate and the Jonestown Massacre. But that's my recommendation. When you're reading a book, it doesn't feel like a book that was written in 1974. It reads like a book that was written right now. So that's my wolf. All right, we're going to wrap this one up for reals now. Again, we are the Comic Book Bears. You can find us on the Facebook as Comic Book Bears Podcast. You can find us on the Twitter and the Tumblr and the Instagram as Comic Book Bears. If you want to write to us, you can do so by writing an email to comicbookbears@gmail.com. And if you want to listen to us, please do so through iTunes, Stitcher Radio, or some of the other podcatchers. Caleb, thank you again for coming on. We love talking to you. And
always my pleasure.
And this was,
Always.
I knew we would have such an amazing conversation on this particular topic with you, and I am certain
I hope
you'll
not.
not disappoint
not.
people at all.
My husband also would like to cordially invite both of you over to watch Vampire Diaries and the originals, because that is his favorite thing.
That's his jam? Okay.
He loves it. He loves it. It's
Well, tell him
ridiculous.
if he hasn't watched Legacies yet, he should watch Legacies. It's not the same, which is probably why I enjoy it so much. But all the characters are basically children of or somehow progeny of characters from the first two series.
I'll absolutely do it. Guys, thank you so much for having me on. It's always a blast. It's always the highlight of any day.
Oh, you're too kind. Way too kind. Like, seriously too kind. So just like the end of any other episode, you're going to hear a woof and an explosion. We'll be back real soon. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Woof!
What a man! They fight each other, the police state wins! Stop your backs and trash our homes! Trash your back if you got real balls! There's nothing but to God for cool! Realize kids on your school like